And joining us now in studio, Mohammad Fadel, professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto. And Mohammad, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Steve.
First things first, you have family in Egypt?
Yes, I do.
Who have you got there?
Uncle, aunt, and in-laws, and cousins.
You heard from them all?
Yeah, we've talked to them on a couple of occasions since this problems have started.
And?
They're fine. I mean, you know, there's a lot of insecurity, but they're all doing well.
They don't intend to leave?
No.
We saw today a quite interesting new development. Pro-Mubarak forces in the streets getting into violent clashes with the anti-Mubarak demonstrators. You've no doubt watched the coverage. What was your reaction when you saw and heard about this?
I wouldn't quite call them pro-Mubarak supporters. I would call them more along the lines of Mubarak-hired thugs. I think the best way to think of them is like the enforcers of a mafia. They're not really political partisans. They have no political viewpoint. They're essentially hired by the government to go after its enemies.
How do you know that?
How do we know that? Well, I mean, I think you can just see them. Egyptians don't normally keep horses and camels at the ready.
That was different, wasn't
right?
it?
And you know, when you see people coming in on horseback and camelback, brandishing weapons and attacking people, that's not really something that happens in the ordinary course. But more importantly, we know through past practice that in any case, in any situation where Egyptians have attempted to mobilize some kind of political protest against Mubarak, whether it's demonstrations against torture, whether they're just lining up to vote for an opposition candidate, these supporters that are actually violent thugs show up and beat up the opposition. This happens again and again and again. Of course, we're not used to it on such a massive scale, but apparently in the face of the massive demonstrations yesterday, the government, you know, put together a massive amount of thugs and unleashed them on the demonstrators.
Is that to say you believe there are no genuine Mubarak supporters in the streets today?
Well, it depends what you mean by genuine Mubarak supporter. Again, the regime is not really a regime that wins loyalty based on a political program. It wins loyalty based on its ability to dispense benefits. It obtains these benefits through a vast network of corruption, which it extracts through various kinds of rents, commissions, sweetheart deals, et cetera, et cetera. And the money that it obtains from this system of corruption, it then uses to buy loyalty. So it has as much loyalty as it can purchase.
Okay, but if you look at nearby Iran, there are people who genuinely believe in the government and show up when demonstrations are required. You know, they may have an interest in perpetuating the current system, but people don't doubt that they actually believe in it as well. Do you think that doesn't exist in Egypt? I
don't think so, because the NDP, the ruling party, Mubarak's party, is not an ideological party. It has no program as such, right? You can't find any sort of set of coherent ideological commitments that constitute a platform of the NDP, which would rally support in the same way that you see in Iran. And again, I think if you contrast the dueling demonstrations that took place after the contested election of Iran in summer of 2008, I guess, there were massive street demonstrations on both sides. It wasn't as though the Iranian government, in the first instant, amassed some sort of street urchins and then let them loose on the opposition. They actually tried to make the case that the elections were not fraudulent, and the evidence for that was having massive demonstrations in support of the regime. We have seen no public demonstrations of ordinary Egyptians marching down the street, going to a square, right, in anything that's comparable to what we saw since January 25th. All we've seen is thuggery.
President Mubarak has promised, of course, to leave office later this year. And I want to get a better understanding from you what you think, and I'm going to ask you to fill in the blanks in a second here, what message is sent to the masses by the demonstrations are continuing. What do you think, what message, I mean, all the cameras have been in Cairo, but presumably everybody around Egypt is watching these things outside Cairo as well. What message does it send to them that the people are still coming into the streets, even though Mubarak's already promised to go?
You mean to the regime?
Yeah.
Yeah, it tells the regime that the people, that the opposition does not take seriously the things he said in his speech yesterday. And there's no reason they should. He has yet to do anything concrete to introduce any of the reforms that the opposition has demanded.
Well, hang on.
He hasn't suspended.
Can I push back a bit on that? Originally, he said he was going to run again. Said he was going to die in office.
He never said he was going to run again.
Well, he said he wanted to die in office, right?
He said he wanted to die in Egypt.
I don't mean the last couple of days. Okay. I mean months ago. He said he was going to run in the
unclear.
Fall elections.
He always left that as a matter of ambiguity.
Okay. Well, now we know he's not going to.
Yes.
Right? So that's a change, isn't it? Isn't that a
Well,
significant bone to the
But
opposition?
there was a substantial chance that he wasn't going to run in any case, so it's not clear. But again, the opposition movement had very clear and quite simple demands. First was elimination of the emergency law. Second was elimination of the parliament that was elected through, you know, a joke of an election that took place a month ago. Third was introducing amendments to amend the Constitution to limit presidential put term limits for presidents. And then I can't remember the fourth one. But clearly the most important one is suspending the emergency law, especially now. If the demonstrators were to acquiesce in the demands of the government and to go home, there's a substantial risk that the very next day, the Ministry of the Interior, with all its 1.5 million policemen, are going to go and arrest all the leaders of this demonstration. We'll see massive arrests. Right?
A perfectly legitimate interpretation. Could another interpretation be, and I don't know, I'm asking you for your view on this, are you concerned that the rest of the world will look at these demonstrators and say, you know what, the guy's promised to go, that should be enough. Everybody go home before anybody else gets killed.
He's already 82 or 83. He's been in office 30 years. His family reportedly has amassed huge amounts of wealth. Just before I came here, ABC News reported a new estimate of in excess of $60 or $70 billion, which frankly I can't take seriously.
60 or 70?
Billion.
Billion.
I find that to be totally implausible, but a few $billion seems reasonable. Now, it's really hard to understand how the world can be upset by the people of a country wanting simply the right to govern themselves, right? Initially, not even wanting to hold him accountable for everything that he's done. Now, I think, legitimately, they need to demand not only that he resign, but that he stand trial.
Stand trial?
Absolutely.
How are they going to do that?
What do you mean, how are they going to do that? I think in any kind of transition like this, Egypt desperately needs for Mubarak and his cronies in the security services to stand trial.
But how do you encourage a man to step down when he knows that it means a trip to the gallows?
Well, it's not I've never recommended anything about a trip to the gallows.
I'm using it figuratively.
Right. Listen, South Africa here is an excellent example. You can have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. In fact, I don't see a need to send an 82-year-old man to jail. But he claims he wants to be a citizen. Yesterday, he gave us this sad story about how he served Egypt his entire life in war and peace, and he has no intent of dying outside of Egypt. And I totally respect that. I think that no citizen of any country should be expelled. But if we're going to take seriously his desire to be treated as a citizen, then every citizen has to be held accountable for his actions. So I'm simply taking him at his word.
I wonder how much contact you've had with your family who are over there, and for this reason, here's what I'm trying to figure out. The people in the streets clearly want him to go, and they clearly want him to go right now. One of the more interesting quotes that I read in one of the papers today was, the people understand what they want today, but 10 feet down the road, they don't really know what they want. They don't know who they want to be the next president. They don't know what the form of government. I mean, there are a ton of questions that are unanswered right now. Has your family given any indication of what they sort of see coalescing at the moment?
Well, right now, I think everybody's attention is rightly on the situation and the fact that the president is refusing to do what he ought to do if he really loves his country, right? Now, everything you say is true, but that's true for any kind of democratic governance. If we said that we shouldn't risk change because we're not sure of what we want, then of course we would always want to have some kind of king or dictator to make decisions for us. But I think what the Egyptians are telling us is that we cannot live our lives where we have no ability to choose anything for ourselves. We have no control for our own destiny. We have no rights. We cannot live anymore like that.
I hear you, but obviously people are using historical analogies, and they are saying, well, there was a revolution in France in 1789, and the people didn't exactly know what they wanted after they got rid of the monarchy. They knew they wanted to get rid of the monarchy, so there was a power vacuum. And guess what? Some guy named Napoleon came in there, and we know what happened after that. So power abhors the vacuum, right?
Yeah, we need to be very careful here, right? Napoleon simply did not rise to power because of the indecision of the French on what kind of government they wanted or what kind of future they wanted. Let's recall that the forces of reaction of monarchical absolutism invaded France, right? All these wars were launched against Republican France to strangle this dangerous disease called democracy in its cradle. Now, I assume that none of Egypt's neighbors are going to invade it, right? Well, I assume
Good assumption.
that our neighbors, that Egypt's neighbors, are not going to wage a guerrilla campaign exploiting discontented elements of the security services. So I hope that there's not going to be external interference trying to destabilize the new Egypt. Now, if that's true, then I think Egyptians will be able to negotiate all these kinds of issues in a peaceful, rational framework and lead to some sort of democratic stability. Now, of course, if there's these other kinds of external threats, then all bets are off.
Sure. Well, 3 people did die today in the clashes. That's the latest we have so far. We certainly haven't seen anything the likes of Tiananmen Square, right? There's been no massive government-sponsored, government-led, army-led crackdown on the public. What do you infer from the fact that the army, at the moment anyway, appears prepared to sort of sit back and watch it all?
Well, I think it shows that the army, or the armed forces in general, have a real conflict of interest here. On the one hand, if they knew that all that they needed to do was get rid of Mubarak, they would have gotten rid of him. I think the problem comes from their perspective that the demands, the political demands of the opposition goes way beyond simply getting rid of Mubarak. They want to get rid of Mubarakism, the whole kind of political system that was based purely on patronage and dispersal of benefits without any regard for rights. They want a real democratic order in Egypt. Now, right now, the army and the armed forces generally are not subject to the supervision of the civilian government. And so for the military, the idea that they would now become subject to civilian supervision, that is a real difficult pill to swallow. And they're trying to decide what the proper position to take here is. So I think what they're trying to do is hedge their bets. They essentially want to see how far the civilians will be able to take this, right? And if they can take everything that the Mubarak security apparatus has to throw against them, right, and they stand strong and fight back, then I think they're willing to live with it. But they're not going to help them get that goal.
So when you say an end to Mubarakism, you're talking about the president out, his newly appointed vice president out.
Certainly as vice president.
He goes next.
He has to go, right? He's a torturer.
So who'd you like to see running the show?
I don't know. There are plenty of great people in Egypt. Egypt is a country with a long history, has a sophisticated civil society. There are full of competent, well-trained, well-educated people in Egypt.
Is Mohammad al-Baradei one of them?
He is one of them, but not the only one. Egypt does not deserve to have military leadership.
How about the Muslim Brotherhood? Would that be okay?
They are certainly part of Egyptian society, and they should be part of any new political future. They shouldn't control it, just like no party should control it in a democracy.
My hunch is, given your Egyptian background, that you watch television in a way unlike 99% of the people in this country who are not of Egyptian background. Do you find yourself cheering, or do you find yourself, you hoping for something, or when you watch it, what are you thinking?
Well, you know, as an American or a Canadian of Egyptian ancestry, somebody who has very strong ties to Egypt, who spent substantial time in Egypt, not, you know, I didn't grow up there. I came to the United States when I was 3 years old. I did spend a year there studying Arabic after college. I spent a year there doing dissertation research. I've gone back from time to time for vacations, for research. And so I'm very hopeful, because I want Egyptians to be able to live normal lives, to be able to live lives of dignity, not lives based on how much power they have in their society. I want them to be able to live a life in a society that respects their rights.
And this may be the moment.
And this may be the moment, and I feel like they have to take advantage of this moment, because a moment like this does not come every day.
No, it barely comes once a generation, and often it goes very bad. I imagine you're terrified at the prospects of that.
I'm not worried at all about that.
Really? Why
I'm
not?
much more worried about the police. Because I know Egyptians. I know their qualifications, I know their background. They are a cultured people. They're sophisticated people. Despite the 30 years of Mubarak, there are lots of vibrant institutions in Egypt. Egyptians have experience in governance on small-scale levels, neighborhood levels, professional union levels. They are more than adequate. They are ready to take responsibility for themselves, as they're showing.
We'll keep watching, and we're grateful to you, Mohammad Fadel from the U of T, for coming in tonight and sharing your views with us. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Steve.